Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. In the editorial page, The Hindu carries a couple of articles. One is an editorial on page number 6 and the other one is a column on the same page written by Mr. Vijay Gokhale, who recently retired as India's Foreign Secretary. Both the articles evaluate the new Cold War that is brewing between the United States and China. In fact, we have been having a discussion on this topic over the last few days, and these two articles, they take the discussion further and they evaluate the reasons behind these increasing geopolitical tensions between US and China, and they analyze the impact of this emerging Cold War on the rest of the world, particularly India. See, this Cold War has been in the making for the last 1 decade, and tensions have particularly increased over the last 4 years as a result of increased aggression that is being displayed by both the countries. What began as a geopolitical conflict over the South China Sea dispute has spilled over into various other domains such as trade, technology, economy, governance, and as well as travel and connectivity. Over the last 1 decade, the United States has closely watched the military rise of China and its increasing military aggression in the South China Sea. In response to this increased military aggression of China, the United States came up with a diplomatic and military strategy that was designed to primarily counter the rising influence of China. So this increasing hostilities in the military and strategic domain quickly spilled over into the trade and economy domain as well under the Trump administration. The trade war that President Trump initiated against China increased tensions between the two countries, and it is yet to be resolved. Then of late, we have also seen how Western countries led by the United States are trying to counter China's dominance in the 5G technology domain. Then in the last 3 months, there have been a series of developments which has increased tensions between the two countries, and this has led strategic experts to conclude that we might very well be witnessing the beginning of a new Cold War between the two superpowers. As we know, President Trump has held China to be responsible for the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. Along with this, the United States has been critical of the developments that have taken place in Hong Kong over the last 1 year. Last year, when pro-democracy protests broke out in Hong Kong, the US government was more than supportive of the protesters, and this invited a retaliatory response from China. Then just a few days back, China passed a controversial legislation which allows mainland China to pass national security laws that will have application and jurisdiction in Hong Kong. It is said that this Chinese legislation undermines the special administrative status that Hong Kong enjoys. The United States has criticized this legislation and it has expressed concern over the status of human rights in Hong Kong. As a response to this Chinese law, the United States decided to revoke Hong Kong's special trade status, and this standoff between the two countries over the developments in Hong Kong has further increased tensions. Then just the other day, the United States decided to ban all passenger flights from China because China had not been allowing any international flights as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So such aggressive and retaliatory steps of both the countries has raised the prospects of the beginning of a new Cold War between the two. So we basically have a situation where the world's largest economy has been repeatedly targeting China over the last 3 to 4 years, and in return, the world's second largest economy has been displaying its own aggression and retaliating against the United States. So this emerging Cold War between two of the world's largest economies that is being fought on economic, financial and strategic grounds faces the risk of further escalation as there is a complete lack of trust and confidence on each other. So the editorial says that disputes such as these can be resolved only through talks and cooperation, and both the countries should be willing to show signs of de-escalation. Take for example the issue of passenger flights. China has already sent a de-escalation signal to the United States by allowing foreign airlines to resume flights on a limited scale starting from the 8th of June. The editorial hopes that the United States should see this as a de-escalation sign from China, and it should reciprocate by lifting the ban on passenger flights from China. Such de-escalation measures will set the ground for further talks and negotiations, which could further help in resolving tensions and hostilities in other domains. But the increasing hostility towards China being shown by the Trump administration and the refusal of China to back down has made the beginning of a new Cold War almost inevitable. But strategic experts point out the so-called Cold War 2.0 or the second version of the Cold War between US and China would be quite different from the earlier Cold War that we had seen a few decades ago between the United States and the Soviet Union. See, the Cold War that we witnessed between the United States and the Soviet Union began after the Second World War in the 1950s, and it lasted until the collapse of the Soviet Union. This Cold War rivalry was largely based on ideological conflict between the two superpowers. If the United States and the Western countries stood for democracy and capitalism, Soviet Union and its allies stood for communism and socialism. So the defining feature of the first Cold War was the ideological conflict between the two superpowers, and it involved territorial conflicts, the threat of an imminent war, the threat of a nuclear war, and as well as a series of covert proxy wars that both the countries waged against each other in order to prevent a third country from falling under the influence of a rival ideology. But in comparison, if you look at the new Cold War that is brewing between the United States and China, it is largely being fought on economic, financial, and strategic grounds, and at least as of now, there is no explicit ideological conflict between the two. So compared to the ideological Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, the emerging Cold War between US and China has a greater chance of being resolved through talks and negotiations. But for talks to be held, there has to be an element of mutual trust and mutual confidence in each other. See, in the past as well, the United States and China have shared quite a complicated relationship. Until the 1970s, that is when the United States was still locked in a Cold War with the Soviet Union, the US saw China as a major communist ally of the Soviet Union. In fact, the United States had even cut off diplomatic ties with China by blaming China for displaying territorial expansionism through the annexation of Tibet. In the other column, Vijay Gokhale writes that during this Cold War period, that is between 1950s and 1970s, the United States saw China as a key ally of the Soviet Union, where communism had firmly established itself. So during this period, the United States pursued a policy of regime change in China in order to push for an ideological shift and defeat communism and introduce democracy. So this covert attempt of the United States to push for a regime change in China created a lot of suspicion amongst China's leadership, and as a result, Chinese leaders to this day treat the United States as an existential threat to China. But Vijay Gokhale writes that before communism took root in China in the 1950s, the United States used to look at China with a sense of fascination. But the rise of communism in the 1940s under Mao Zedong and the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949 affected the relations between these two countries for nearly a period of 2 decades. After this brief period of hostility, US President Richard Nixon pursued a diplomatic reset with China through his national security advisor Henry Kissinger. In the late 1960s, the combination of Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger managed to re-establish diplomatic relations with China with the help of Pakistan, and this led to a period of cordial relations between the two countries, which lasted between the 1970s and the early 2000s. During this period, the United States pursued a pragmatic relationship with China by keeping the ideological conflicts aside, and it built a relationship on the basis of peaceful trade, cooperation, mutual trust, and mutual respect. In fact, from the 1980s, the United States played a direct role in the economic rise of China under the hope that it could bring China under its sphere of influence, and it was expecting China to behave as a responsible international player. But according to Vijay Gokhale, all the while, China was driven by its self-interest and national interests, and it had no intention of being undermined by the United States, and it had no intention of being treated as a puppet of the United States. Further, the suspicion that the United States posed an existential threat to China continued to grow in the minds of the Chinese leadership, even as the United States was enabling the rise and growth of China. So as soon as China emerged as a major power post-2000, it immediately started asserting its newfound economic and military might. And according to the writer, the current aggression that China displays is an extension of this mindset. So by 2005, China started seeing itself as not just an Asian power, but as a global power which could challenge the American hegemony in international affairs. Then through a series of diplomatic, military, economic and strategic steps, China began to assert itself in global affairs and it began to spread its influence around the world, including the Asia Pacific region, the Indian Ocean region, across Europe, Africa, and as well as Latin America. This strategy of China pushed it into a direct conflict with the United States, which started seeing the economic and military rise of China as a direct threat to its economic and financial dominance of the modern world. And as China started to assert itself with regard to maritime disputes in the South China Sea, for the first time, the United States started seeing the rise of China as a threat to its own dominance. So post 2010, the United States immediately adopted the pivot to Asia policy in order to focus exclusively on the Indo-Pacific region, and it started deploying its diplomatic and military assets from the Atlantic region towards the Indo-Pacific region. So this strategy of the US was clearly designed to contain the rise of China and contain its influence. In anticipation of this existential threat posed by the United States, China initiated a modernization plan in almost all the domains a couple of decades ago in order to challenge American dominance. As a result of these modernization plans, China has been able to completely transform its military and armed forces. It has built a strong economy based on its manufacturing strength. It has also tried to counter Western dominance in global trade and commerce, in global financial institutions, through its initiatives such as the Belt and Road Initiative, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and the New Development Bank of BRICS. Then, in order to counter American dominance in satellite-based navigation, China came up with its own version of GPS known as the Beidou. Then, over the last 1 decade, private technology companies of China, with the support of the Chinese government, have pioneered innovations in the field of emerging technologies in order to counter the technological superiority of the US government and its private corporations. All these developments brings us to the current state where the Trump administration has repeatedly tried to label China as America's enemy number one and has pursued an aggressive and hostile relationship with China in the hope that this issue could help Donald Trump get re-elected in the upcoming presidential elections. See, Trump's popularity ratings have drastically declined over the last few months as a result of his inefficient handling of the COVID-19 pandemic and the current state of the American economy, where the unemployment rate is consistently increasing. So the editorial is of the opinion that Trump is exploiting China's lack of transparency over the COVID-19 outbreak and its aggressive and assertive foreign policy to label China as America's enemy number one in order to make China a campaign issue ahead of the presidential elections. In response, China has retaliated against these actions of Donald Trump, and this has only increased the prospects of a new Cold War. So the editorial says that the only way in which tensions can be reduced between US and China is if both the countries are willing to change the course and provide a chance for talks and negotiations in order to build mutual trust and mutual confidence. Then Vijay Gokhale says that this emerging Cold War between US and China is going to have a collateral damage on the global economy, particularly on India. As we discussed yesterday, if India is forced to choose a side between the two, then it would test India's principle of strategic autonomy and it would test India's capacity to maintain strategic and decisional autonomy in its foreign policy. Now let's take up another editorial from page number 6, which deals with the topic of man-animal conflict. Recent news reports related to the death of an elephant in the Palakkad district of Kerala, reportedly after consuming a pineapple filled with explosives, has gone viral and has caused massive outrage across the country. These initial reports had claimed that the elephant was deliberately fed with the pineapple, which led to greater revulsion and anger across the country. But however, according to experts, the elephant most likely might have consumed the pineapple on its own, which was meant to be used as a snare to scare away or kill wild boars, which cause extensive damage to plantation crops. But whatever is the version of events, the death of the pregnant elephant in this tragic manner is highly unfortunate, and it highlights the threat posed to India's environment and biodiversity due to increasing incidents of man-animal conflict. The editorial points out that a number of elephants get killed every year in India as a result of such man-animal conflict incidents, and this is a direct result of increasing commercial pressure on the habitat of the elephant. See, the need to expand our urban areas and agricultural activities and the need to promote industrial and economic activities has ended up destroying sensitive habitats and forests, and as a result, for migratory animals such as elephants, their traditional ranges have been occupied and their migratory corridors have been blocked by human activities. In fact, it is not just elephants which have been pushed into a conflict with humans due to habitat destruction and habitat fragmentation, but even a number of other high-value species and threatened species face the same threat. As the contact of wild animals with humans increases, it increases the threat faced by the animal itself. The editorial points out that despite the threat posed by habitat destruction and unregulated economic activities to the natural ranges and corridors of wild animals, there has been no attempt made by the government to mitigate the impact of economic development and industrialization. The editorial says that the government has failed to adopt a science-based policy to prevent incidents of man-animal conflict by adopting measures such as the creation of soft landscapes, the provision of migratory passages, especially in and around protected areas, while approving new industrial projects and new economic activities. According to the editorial, there is no scientific culture in India which inspires the government's conservation efforts. The editorial says that environmental policies and regulations of the government have been designed to favor economic development and commercial activities, even at the cost of destroying forests and the natural habitats of wild animals. Take for example, how even during the lockdown, the Ministry of Environment, the National Board for Wildlife and the Expert Appraisal Committee managed to clear a number of disruptive projects in protected areas, despite these projects being opposed by environmental groups. Such rampant destruction of natural habitat of the animals reduces their ranges and makes the feeding grounds inaccessible to them. So this reduction in their natural habitat and the acute shortage of food that they face pushes the animals to venture into human-habited areas such as nearby villages, nearby agricultural fields, plantations, etc. So when such incidents of man-animal conflict increases, the cost is borne by both the animals and as well as by the local villagers. For example, the entry of wild elephants and wild boars into agricultural fields and plantations could cause extensive damage to the farmer. The entry of carnivorous animals such as tigers could threaten human lives and cattle in the nearby villages. So locals who would have suffered such losses as a result of man-animal conflict, they tend to hold a grudge against the animals, and in order to prevent the recurrence of such incidents, they tend to use a number of inhuman and violent techniques to keep the animals away. So every year, hundreds of elephants, tigers, leopards, and other high-value species and threatened species are killed across the country as a result of such preventive techniques. So in order to reduce such incidents of man-animal conflict, the editorial provides two suggestions. One, the editorial highlights how important it is for us to revisit the recommendations of the Madhav Gadgil Committee. See, the Ministry of Environment and Forest had set up the Western Ghats Ecology Expert Panel under the chairmanship of Madhav Gadgil. This committee had submitted its recommendations in 2011, and in order to conserve the ecology and biodiversity of the Western Ghats, the Madhav Gadgil Committee had recommended the zonification of the entire stretch of the Western Ghats into 3 eco-sensitive zones, and inside each zone, human activities were supposed to be strictly regulated with varying degrees of enforcement. These restrictions and regulations would apply for industrial activities, mining activities, construction activities, agriculture, etc. But all the state governments that are a part of the Western Ghats had opposed the recommendations of the Madhav Gadgil Committee due to pressure from the industry and as well as from the local villagers. The editorial says that such science-based zonification of forest areas and regulation of industrial activities can help conserve our habitats and prevent the occurrence of such man-animal conflicts. The second recommendation of the editorial is for the government to provide adequate and timely compensation to the victims of man-animal conflict incidents. Because when the victims who have suffered losses due to man-animal conflicts, if they are compensated adequately and if they are compensated in time, it will reduce the chances of them adopting such inhuman violent methods to keep the animals away. The editorial concludes by saying that it is this culture of commercial exploitation of our forests and natural resources that has led to the death of this elephant in Kerala, and it could change only if we adopt a cultural shift towards science-based conservation. Next, we have another column on page number 6, which evaluates the recent reforms that were introduced with regard to defense procurement, defense indigenization, and defense modernization. But we have covered these topics quite a few times in the recent weeks, so I would request you to go through this column once. Next, on page number 10, we have an article that refers to the India-Australia Virtual Summit that was held between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison. We have discussed the detailed background of India-Australia relations on the 30th of May. So in this discussion, let us just focus on the key developments that took place at the virtual summit. See, first and foremost, India and Australia have decided to elevate their bilateral relationship to the comprehensive strategic partnership level. This basically means that they will widen the scope of their relationship by entering into cooperation in newer domains, and they will further deepen their relationship in the existing domains of cooperation. And as expected, India and Australia have signed the Mutual Logistics Support Agreement, which will promote exchange of logistics between the armed forces of both the countries. Through this agreement, the Indian Armed Forces will be able to access the military bases and military facilities of the Australian Armed Forces, and this is expected to further enable cooperation between the two countries in the field of disaster management, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, joint exercises, joint operations, counter-terrorism, anti-piracy operations, etc. Then both the countries have signaled their focus on the Indo-Pacific region by coming out with a joint declaration that outlines the shared vision of India and Australia towards maritime cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region. Upon this, India and Australia have decided to elevate their 2+2 dialogue from the secretary level to the ministerial level. Under this format, at least once in every 2 years, the foreign ministers and defense ministers of both the countries would be interacting in order to bring greater synergy in the foreign policy and national security policy of both the countries. During the virtual summit, the two prime ministers did focus extensively on the Indo-Pacific region, and both the leaders have expressed support for a free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific region that is governed through a rules-based order. Both the countries have reiterated that all countries in the Indo-Pacific region should uphold freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight, which is a basic right that has been recognized under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which is an international law. Both the leaders have called upon countries in the Indo-Pacific region to resolve any maritime disputes through peaceful negotiations as per the mechanisms that have been laid out under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Both the leaders have called upon countries in the Indo-Pacific region to refrain from using any coercive techniques while dealing with maritime disputes, and instead they have asked them to abide by the provisions of international law as laid out under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. So all these statements and initiatives of India and Australia concerning the Indo-Pacific region has been clearly designed to send a clear message to China. The message to China is that it cannot employ coercive techniques while dealing with maritime disputes in the South China Sea and in the East China Sea. The message to China is that it cannot restrict freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight, and it needs to respect the rules-based order that has been laid out under international law. In fact, these principles that India and Australia have spoken about are the very same principles that the United States has championed in order to counter Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific region. But apart from this, there has been no specific discussion between the Indian Prime Minister and the Australian Prime Minister on China. Both the leaders have not made any direct references to China, and even the ongoing border dispute between India and China was reportedly not discussed. Another issue that was not brought up was Australia's request to take part in the Malabar exercise that is hosted by India along with the United States and Japan. It is quite possible that India and Australia are putting off this decision for the time being in order to not unnecessarily trigger China. Apart from this, India and Australia have signed an agreement to promote cooperation in the field of cybersecurity as well. Because Australia is a leader in the domain of cybersecurity, and it has gained a lot of expertise by being a part of the Five Eyes group. The Five Eyes refers to an intelligence collection and intelligence sharing group between 5 like-minded democratic countries, including the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. So by being a part of this group, Australia has gained considerable expertise in the domain of cybersecurity as well, and India would like to collaborate with Australia in order to strengthen its cybersecurity architecture. Then finally, India and Australia have signed a key agreement to promote mining and joint exploitation of critical and strategic minerals such as rare earth metals. See, rare earth metals are of great strategic value, especially in industries such as defense, electronics, space, aeronautics, etc. Unfortunately, India happens to be deficient with regard to such a critical resource, but Australia and the Indo-Pacific region is said to hold substantial reserves of rare earth metals. So both India and Australia would like to collaborate in this domain and jointly exploit rare earth metals in order to extract critical minerals that find application in strategic industries. Now let's take up the practice questions for today. World Environment Day was established during Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment. Option C is the right answer. See, the World Environment Day is celebrated on the 5th of June every year, that is today. This day was established in 1972 at the UN Conference on Human Environment, or also known as the Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment. And this day is being celebrated from 1974 onwards. Now let's take up the next practice question. The Periodic Labour Force Survey is brought out by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Option B is the right answer. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 1, India's unemployment rate has improved slightly from the 45-year high of 6.1% in 2017-18 to 5.8% in 2018-19 according to the Periodic Labour Force Survey, which is brought out by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? The Urban Learning Internship Program, or TULIP, is a part of the Smart City Mission. The scheme is a 5-year joint venture between the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs and the All India Council for Technical Education. Both the statements are correct. Option C is the right answer. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 11, the central government has launched a new internship scheme for fresh college graduates under the Smart City Mission. This internship scheme is known as TULIP, or the Urban Learning Internship Program, and it has been launched as a 5-year joint venture between the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs and the AICTE. This internship scheme has been launched under the Smart City Mission as per a promise the government had made under the 2020 budget. Under this scheme, smart cities and urban local bodies, they can hire fresh college graduates, especially from technical background, as interns in order to bring in fresh energy and ideas into urban governance. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, is a public-private global health partnership with the goal of increasing access to immunization in poor countries. It brings together developing countries, donor governments, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, the World Bank, the vaccine industry in both industrialized and developing countries, research and technical agencies, civil society, and other private philanthropists. The third statement says that Gavi has observer status at the World Health Assembly. Then India recently hosted Gavi 2020 summit. Amongst the given statements, the fourth statement is incorrect because the Gavi 2020 summit was hosted by the United Kingdom, not by India. But all the other three statements are correct, so option C is the right answer. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 14, the government of India has pledged around $15 million to Gavi, or the Global Vaccine Alliance, in order to fund the development of vaccines for various diseases and promote immunization programs in poor countries. During the Global Vaccine Summit that was hosted by the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that India is the world's foremost producer of vaccines, and as a result of the expertise of its pharmaceutical industry, India has been able to contribute to the immunization of about 60% of the world's children. So in order to further these efforts and in order to increase India's contribution towards global immunization, India has contributed $15 million to Gavi, that is the Global Vaccine Alliance. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? Palakkad Gap is a low mountain pass in the Western Ghats between Coimbatore and Palakkad and is located between the Nilgiri Hills to the north and Annamalai Hills to the south. The gap affects weather patterns in southern India as it allows the moisture-laden southwest monsoon winds into western Tamil Nadu, moderating summer temperatures. It acts as an important transport corridor between Tamil Nadu and Kerala. All the three statements are correct. Option D is the right answer. Please look at this map. This is where the Palakkad Gap or the Pal Ghat is located. Now let's take up a practice question from the 2019 prelims paper. What was the purpose of inter-creditor agreement signed by Indian banks and financial institutions recently? The correct answer is option D, to aim at faster resolution of stressed assets of 50 crore or more which are under consortium lending. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, with a new kind of Cold War brewing between United States and China, both countries should rebuild mutual trust. For India, this geopolitical rivalry presents a binary choice between the United States and China and is likely to test India's capacity to maintain strategic and decisional autonomy in its foreign policy. Evaluate. The second question, the lack of a scientific culture in India and the failure to spare forested lands from commercial exploitation is eviscerating nature and leading to increasing incidents of man-animal conflict. Discuss. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. Then before we conclude, I would like to remind you that the UPSC has come out with a revised schedule for this year's civil services examination. As per this revised schedule, the preliminary examination is set to be held on the 4th of October and the mains examination is set to be held from the 8th of January 2021. So kindly take note of these changes and prepare accordingly. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.